Alright, so I'm working through cleaning the pistons. I figured I'd show the procedure real quick. So for one, making sure everything is marked really well. So you can see some of the marking remains in the piston crown from the carbon that's still there, but I'm also punching in the numbers on the underside of the piston. The biggest thing when cleaning pistons that are going to be reused is cleaning out the ring grooves, especially for this, which has been burning crazy amounts of oil. So what you do is you take the ring and you break it in two, and you use the end that you didn't snap, which is this end on this ring, and you basically run it through like that, and you scrape all of the carbon out, and it's really pretty impressive how much comes out. On these, for the oil ring grooves, the second ring fits pretty well, so that's what you use to scrape it out, and there's a lot of carbon that comes out. So that's the biggest thing. You got to make sure the new rings are going to spin freely in their grooves. You do have to be careful. The rings are steel and the pistons are aluminum, so you can remove material from the ring grooves, which you do not want to do. So you don't want to go crazy cleaning. You can see these pistons still have some staining and stuff in the grooves, but all the chunky stuff is out. I like to not go crazy because I don't want to distort any of the ring grooves. People probably disagree with me on that, like everything, but another thing I'm doing is, doing a cursory clean of the piston crown. Again, not critical, since these are just going back into a, used engine basically. And since we had the timing belt failure, I'm also dressing down all the edges of where the valves hit the piston. You can see this piston is yet to be cleaned, so I figured I'd kind of show the difference between a clean and dirty ring groove. So for one, you can see the tops there. There's another shot at how carboned up that third oil ring is. So you can see in here how much just chunky stuff is built up under the rings. So after going through and cutting all that stuff out, should be pretty much all shiny aluminum looking. So you can see how much better those grooves look. So I'm going to do this last piston and then start cleaning up everything else. And then I'll bring you back once we're ready to get the pistons back in. One more note on cleaning. Obviously I'm going to clean the deck before I get the pistons back in, because you might as well. This deck is really pretty clean because they use a multi-layer steel gasket with like a little rubberized coating on it. Compared to the older style composite gaskets, these are super easy to clean. I just get a really sharp new razor blade and scrape on edge. You just have to be careful because the block's obviously aluminum. You don't want to scrape and gouge anything. So I'll scrape all that stuff out, clean the bores out, then we get the pistons in. And for the oil pan, obviously we have a little bit more involved cleaning to do here. We got to get all the old gross oil out. And the type of sealant that Volvo used on the pan really leaves very little residue. It's like an anaerobic sealant, I believe. So not a whole lot of RTV to scrape off or anything. Obviously we'll clean off the mating surface on the block. And then also, while it's out, might as well pressure wash the pan because it's pretty gross. So I'll do all that and then bring you guys back. Show you how much crud comes out of these pistons. See that? So you can kind of hear it. It's really that thick, crunchy stuff that needs to come out. And you can see the transition from, bare aluminum to caked on carbon, and that stuff kind of chips right up. Just like that, and here it chip up, and there's aluminum. So a little tedious, but important. Alright, one more thing I'll mention on these pistons is all pistons have actually, these oil drain back holes, and they can get clogged up with carbon. So I like to run a torch cleaner through them, like what's used for an acetylene torch, and that just helps make sure these holes are totally cleared up. Definitely want to get any carbon out of there, because as the oil ring scrapes, any oil that gets scraped on the downstroke or the upstroke gets funneled back through these oil drain back holes where they come back in to the crankcase from here. So if those are plugged up, the oil can't drain back, you get buildup on the rings, and the whole problem starts again. So important to make sure those are all clear. Alright, so it's time to put our new piston rings on. And I believe last time I said the Volvo recall fix is to replace the weird spiral design oil ring with a traditional oil ring, and I was actually wrong about that, unfortunately. I believe the 4 cylinders that also had the same issue, they have you replace the pistons and then use the traditional style ring. On these ones, I think we are stuck with the weird spiral ring. However, they redesigned them and opened up or enlarged the openings apparently. So let's compare it to one of the old ones and see. So the spirals look the same to me there. I'm guessing what they did is open up the holes in this ring, which actually you can't even see in the old one. So I'm going to scrape around on that. Oh wow, yeah. So you can see, well, you can't see actually. If you look really close right there, there is what is supposed to be a drain back hole. You see how tiny that is? Compared to these holes, which are a little bit bigger. Not as big as I would like to see, but I guess we're stuck with it, unfortunately. So what we're going to do is make sure this thing gets regular oil changes, and additionally we'll run an engine oil flush every other oil change, and that'll hopefully be a preventative for any buildup that may occur. We're just kind of stuck with the idiotic ring design, unfortunately. But it is what it is. This will definitely fix the problem. We just got to make sure it doesn't come back. So this oddball ring design, you start with the spiral, get it down into the 3rd groove. You see it's got this little expanding piece that slides. So we'll shove the ring back together. Okay, so the spiral's in there. Now, very carefully, we've got to pull this outer part up and over. Tricky thing is you got to make sure that the spiral ring sits on the inside of that outer ring, just like that. Then for the other rings, the main thing we got to watch out for is the second ring has this step on it, so we got to make sure to orient that properly. And the top ring has a dot that needs to go up. On the second ring, it's printed top, so we know that goes up. In other words, the step faces down to the bottom. So we'll just expand this. Over and on. Make sure it spins nice and free in the groove. Do our top ring. There we go. And one thing, a lot of people go all nuts on making sure the ring gaps are oriented like 120 degrees apart, and we're like 70 degrees, 70.34 degrees. In my opinion, it's not that big of a deal. You just don't want to get the rings lined up exactly. because the rings spin as the engine is running, so it's not a huge deal. So I like to just put them basically 180 apart, and there's no real important orientation for the oil ring because it's just a scraping oil. It's not really a compression ring at all. But that piston's good to go, so I'm going to go ahead and put the rings on the rest of the pistons, and then we'll start dropping them into the engine. One more thing. There's the part number for the piston rings. This is also listed in the recall document. This is the piston. These are the piston rings that you have to get for correcting the oil burning problem. Alright, so piston rings are all on. I'll add that I did check a set in the bores just to make sure that the gaps they came with were proper. I mean, they're genuine parts, so you'd expect that they should be, and they are. Went ahead and removed the cap for number 1 connecting rod. You want to make sure it's marked relative to each other, so we know this way's forward on the piston, because I marked all the numbers on the front end of the piston. And we also have the cap marked with forward. Additionally, they're broken rods, so they're forged and then cracked, and they only fit together one way. So that's all good. We'll make sure. I did pop out our bearing half. We don't want it to pop out when we're tapping the piston in. That would be unfortunate. So we'll just make sure the ring grooves are 180-ish out from each other. Got our piston ring compressor here. So we'll just get this open. You can rent these at any auto parts store for like 15 bucks or something. Or you can buy them for like $5-10. I like to give these just a coat of motor oil. Hope everything slide in. Now, usually when you're replacing piston rings, you want to do a hone at the very least on the bores. Volvo doesn't call for any kind of hone or anything, so we are not doing one. I mean, obviously, they've engineered this solution and it is fine, so, I mean, not my favorite thing in the world, but we're going by the book. And also, I don't even know what ring material this is, so I don't even know what kind of hone grit they would need. But this should be fine. So let's bring this over to the car and we'll tap her in. Alright, so make sure you get everything oriented properly. Yeah, can't speak. Oriented properly. We'll tap the compressor to be even with the deck. These are real low tension rings, so it's not hard to install these. Big heavy rings like on a V8 with big bores, ooh, they can be a pain sometimes. Also, I'll add, I made sure to turn it so the crank journal for number 1 is all the way at the bottom of its stroke, just so we don't risk hitting it when we tap this in. So we want to give it sharp blows, but not hard. So basically I'm just letting the hammer drop on it, and the fast, sharp blows help the ring get past the transition, and in it goes. If it binds up, you take it back out, reclamp it, and do it again. Usually what happens is the ring compressor will come up off the deck in a place. That's why you got to tap around it to start with. And in that case, you just pull it back out and redo it. Otherwise, you risk breaking a ring. And bad things happen when you do that. So, now I'm going to go under there. I'll just slip the bearing half into the connecting rod. We'll put the lower cap onto it, and we'll grab our new bolts and torque her to spec. Alright, so you can see that's where we're working right there. Torque spec on the bolts is 30 Newton meters and then an additional 90 degrees. They are torque to yield, so like I said, we have new ones to replace them with. So first things first, we'll make sure our crank is totally clean. Except for oil, obviously. Which we're looking good, and then we'll just pull our piston down. I'm going to show you a little bit more. Give it a couple more taps up top. Okay. So we'll slide the bearing into place. It's really hard for you to see probably because it's hard for me to see. Okay, bearing half is in place. Pull the connecting rod all the way down almost. We'll just give her a couple squirts of oil to pre-lube. Doing this under the car is a little weird because it's been a long time since I did this under the car. I usually do it out on a stand. Okay, our cap's ready to go on. Give our bolts a light coating of oil so we get an accurate torque reading. And now we're ready to torque. So, first 30 Newton meters. Alright, now 90 degrees. So, I like to put a mark on the bolt. 90 degrees is easy. It's pretty easy to tell by eye, but I have a fancy torque wrench that reads degrees. There we go. And there we go. So now we'll make sure it still rotates freely. Still rotates very freely. So 1 down, 4 to go. I will not make you sit through this. So I'll bring you guys back once all of the 4 left to do are back on. Alright, so I got the block oil pan mating surface all cleaned up. There are 3 O-rings that we gotta make sure are in place. I decided I'm not gonna go hog wild cleaning the pan out with pressure wash and everything because I don't want to get soaking wet and I just want to get it on. So it's gonna get pretty much dirty immediately anyways, so we'll run it as it is. We do have to use a special sealant for this pan, or at least it calls for one. You could probably get away with regular ultra gray RTV or whatever. But we've got Reassembling, which is a Victor Reins sealant. So I believe it's an anaerobic type, so it seals really quick on small gaps. On bigger gaps it takes a while. So let's go over to the pan. We'll get our bolts all ready and get the sealant spread out, and then I'll get the pan up and on. We do have to move kind of quick because it skins over pretty fast, which I guess makes it not anaerobic, so I must be thinking of something else. So here's the sealant I was talking about, Reassembling. I think this is not actually anaerobic, it's anthracite, I don't even know what that is. Anyways, the valve cover sealant, Rhinzoplast, is anaerobic, so that's what I was thinking of. This stuff I think is similar to RTV, but we're going to go ahead and do the whole surface is what the technical service bulletin calls for, so that's what we'll do. There's actually like a special Volvo tool that's like a paint spreader, but we'll just squeeze it on. I'm going to make sure the bolts are ready down below, and I'll set you guys up. Also forgot to mention I got the pickup installed. It just has a seal and goes into that hole. These 2 bolts. The bolting calls for a torque spec of 17 Newton meters if you are putting this together and want to use a torque wrench. Yeah, so just doing a final check over before we get the pan up and in, and looks like actually it's good I checked because we had no ring fall out. So I'm gonna put a bit of goo on there, make sure it gets held up. Alright, so this actually just looks like normal black RTV to me, but whatever. So, go set you guys up and we'll get this up and in real quick. Alright, you guys get the idea. Alright, so now we will get our oil cooler back up and in. I did get new seals for this. Just takes these little green seals that push in to the oil pan. Don't really get retained very well. And then put our bolts back in. Which we have that one stupid bolt, which I think I said we would replace, but we we'll just fight it. And I think really the only other 2 or maybe 3 things we got to do down here is the AC compressor, which we'll leave until the very end because we got to take the crank pulley off. And if I remember right, I don't have the special stretch belt tool that Volvo specifies. And actually, this is a new compressor. I did a compressor job on this car because the clutch went out in the old one. So we'll leave that until the timing belt's all wrapped up. And then we just have the charge pipe that goes across here. I'm trying to think if there's anything else we had to remove. I don't think so. Oh wait, now I'm thinking about it, the AC compressor doesn't go off the crank. It goes off the power steering pump. So, we could actually get that on right now. If I were doing this all day, I'd make a special tool. I'd just cut a T40 bit nice and short, and then you could get the box end of a ratcheting wrench on that, and this would be a breeze. But I don't really want to ruin all my T40 bits, so. But I'm sure the dealership guys probably do that, because they probably do this recall, or at least did when it was still being done quite a bit. Alright, not too bad. Let's get the charge pipe on. Might as well. Okay, we just gotta... Oh, must have hit you guys at some point. One thing that is kind of annoying is these clamps are kind of held in place with this metal clip. So you can't rotate them really to position the end of the hose clamp where you can get to it easy. Okay. Probably an assembly line thing. Makes it faster. There we go. Okay. Alright, and then these hose clamps are 7mm, or a screwdriver, but they're kind of positioned where a screwdriver is really annoying to get at. I want to make sure to get these tight enough or else they'll pop off. Alright, so I guess we should be able to get the AC compressor on. So, you can go grab the bolts for that. Alright, so this belt is a bit of a pain to get on, because like I said, this is a stretch belt. There's no adjustment. There's a special tool. I don't have it. So what I found works is you get the belt started, and then tighten up the alternator mounting bolts, just so that it can kind of give you enough play. There you go. Kind of spin it on. It's not the right way to do it, but. And the AC compressor has an alignment dowel on this rear bolt. I might have to fight with this for a while, we'll see. Ugh, crap all over my face. Ugh, pry bar pry. I don't think that's the right bolt. Alright, so the only thing you gotta be careful of with this is that you don't cross thread anything. So you don't want to fight the threads. It's all into aluminum, but you can see they're all started now. Okay, and there we go. AC compressor's on. Cool. Alright, so with that, I believe we're actually done under here. Completely, pretty much. We had to come in from the wheel well to get at the timing belt stuff, which actually we're going to do now because I haven't completely disassembled it. And we're going to want to get it all the way clear before we get the cylinder head on. So let's go get that tire off and start looking over there. So I already have the inner wheel lining off. Real simple to get off. You just got a bunch of, I think they're like 8mm screws, a couple Phillips heads. Oh, you're just looking at my arm, sorry. and off she comes. Interesting. Well, not entirely sure what. Why that is there. This thing was in a front end accident at some point. Was repaired reputably, but I don't know if that's stock or not. Anyways, here's where we need to be. So you can see there's our AC compressor that we were just working on. Now we got to pull this nut off, and then we can get the harmonic damper off. So, all right. So I believe this nut is a 29 millimeter or 1 3/16 inch. Impact should zip it right off. Well, actually, I think I had it on kind of loose because I just put stuff back together to see if valves are bent. It should just walk right off. There we go. Belt that we cut earlier. So you can see we got a whole bunch of junk in here. Old belt junk. So, pull this section off. Okay. So, you'll see on here, we have this timing mark. That is going to line up with that mark there. Let me zoom you in. That timing mark. This is also a good time to check your front crank seal in any timing belt job, really. Ours is looking good, and in my experience, if it's not leaking, just don't touch it, because a lot of times it's really hard to get a seal installed right, especially when you're driving over a crank like this, and there's a good chance it'll leak. If it's leaking, then obviously replace it, but like this one, it's fine, so we're going to leave it. I'm going to get all this junk out of the timing cover area, because you don't want any oil on our new belt. And definitely no belt remnants that would get caught up on the pulleys. So when I took this apart, I probably should have filmed it, but the serpentine belt, or what was once a serpentine belt, was wrapped around this pulley and the crank. It was a whole mess. And what happens on these is, let me grab the timing cover. So here is our original timing cover. It goes up and sits about like so. This is supposed to be flat, but you can see it's all curvy, and there is a little rubber seal right here, and this rubs against the serpentine belt when it warps. I don't know why this is warped. I don't know what warped it, but it's warped. So over whatever amount of miles it rubs, the serpentine belt eventually lets go from rubbing, breaks, and there's no real positive seal between this cover and the inside of the timing cover. So the serpentine belt just goes right through, gets wrapped up in that pulley that I just took off, and sad, expensive things happen. So this is our new timing cover. You can see it's dead straight. Here's that little rubber seal flapper I was talking about. So on these, in my opinion, it's important to check the serpentine belt often and maybe proactively replace them, because a serpentine belt break can be catastrophic on these. And every serpentine belt that I've seen on this car in these engines results in a timing belt issue. So definitely keep up on those. This is also a good time to check all of the pulleys. This tensioner was replaced when I did the job last time. I think it was just the cover issue. So definitely replace the tensioner. But yeah, other than that, we should be good to go. So final wipe down in here. I mean, we're not ready for the belt yet, obviously, but what we're going to do is align the crank up. And this pulley only goes on one way. You see there's a double tooth right there. That's only going to line up with the double tooth on the crank. like that. And what we're going to do is we are going to turn this until, grab the nut, until we got the crank at the timing mark. And then we're going to look and see where the pistons sit. If one of the pistons are at top dead center, we're going to back it off a little bit, because as we're turning the camshafts, we don't want any risk of interference while we're setting the timing marks. Probably make more sense here in a second. So there is our mark lined up. Let's look up top. Yeah, so it looks like number 1 is almost at top dead center. So what we're going to do is we're going to back off from that and see where the pistons end up. Go a little bit more just to be safe, although I don't know if piston number 4 is coming up or down. So yeah, it looks like number 4 is up. So we'll kind of split the difference. That should be safe right there. So we'll want to get the cams close to where they're going to need to be before we put it on, but in case we got to rotate them, we don't want any risk of valve contact. Alright, so at this point, I'm going to do a final clean on the deck. Just to wipe down, remove any residual oil or anything. And then I'm going to go grab our freshly rebuilt head, and we are just about ready to get it on. So bring you guys back once I got that. Alright, so here is our fresh cylinder head. See, we have all new valves because every single one of them was bent, of course. Surfaced. Valve job, obviously. Guys were good, luckily. And lifter adjustment, because I don't have the special tool, because the bearing caps for the cams are integral to the valve cover, so you have to have a special tool to do it. Anyways, we should be all good to go on this head. We're just going to need to clean the surface, and also before we put it on, we need to get all of our exhaust studs back in. So here's one of them. You can see the nut was just sticking to the stud. So what we'll do is I'll put 2 nuts, tighten them together, zip that one off. Hopefully, if it needs heat, we'll heat it, and then it should come right off. And then we'll install them all, and I won't film it. It's just gonna be boring. After that, we got to get this rear bracket on. I guess we could probably do that in the car also, so maybe we'll wait on that. Other than that, I think we're about ready to go, so I'm going to get all the studs in, clean the head off, and then we can get the head gasket onto the block. Alright, so our studs are back in. One did snap, so we'll deal with that later. We can do it in the car. Honestly, you could probably replace with a bolt and be fine, but we will deal with that later. Now we're ready to get our head gasket installed onto the block. So here it is. It only goes one way. This side down on the block, you can see the letters stick up, and it's asymmetric, so it should only fit one way. So let's go drop it down. So we should be able to align it based on our oil drain back holes. Let me see, that's upside down. There we go. Got our dowel pins in the dowel pin holes. Everything is looking good. I'm going to unplug this coolant temp sensor just to get us a little bit more headroom. Try to move everything out of the way best I can. That way we're not having to fight too much. We don't want to slide the head too much because we don't want to put any gouges in it. Not a huge deal if we do, because the only place that should be contacting is stuff that's going to be external of any critical seals. So yeah, we should be fine. But minimize any dragging. Let's get you guys over and I guess heft this thing on. I am going to pull out the cams just to take some weight out of it for me, and plus they're not even in the right place anyways. One more thing to mention, I did go through and run a bolt through every single one of the head bolt holes by hand just to make sure it goes all the way and bottoms out by hand. If it doesn't, then you've got to chase the threads, or maybe coolant got in there. I looked down on all of them and all look good, no coolant. If there's coolant that spills into there while you're taking the head off and you tighten the bolt down, you'll either not get an accurate torque reading, or worst case, you can actually crack the block from the hydraulic locking. So, important to check that. Alright, here we go. Went a little easier than I thought. Give it a couple taps with rubber mallet. Make sure it's seated down. Ah, shoot. I didn't put the gasket on today. The exhaust manifold gasket, that is. I don't know if we got enough wiggle room to squeeze it in there. I don't think so. Okay, well, back off it comes. Awesome. Okay, looks like a bunch of crap. Well, it's not great. Got scraped off a little bit. Should be okay though. That's what stupidity gets you. Okay, everywhere else looks fine. This time, we'll do it with the gasket. There we go. Jeez, okay. You can see why the official Volvo procedure has you pull the turbo, but that in and of itself honestly feels harder than this entire job. Last time I did it, that was seriously no fun. But it's on there, should be good now. Let's get our bolts in. Alright, so we have all new L-ring head bolts. Give them a light coat of oil. Alright, so these are all 14mm head bolts. There's the torque procedure. We go 20 Newton meters, 60 Newton meters, and an additional 130 degrees with that pattern. Let's go ahead and run these all down. See if our speed wrench will fit. Looks like it, kind of. Not so speedy. I also forgot to oil the underside of the heads. Go in here. Now for our first step of 20 Newton meters. Now I'm going to mark the heads of all the bolts, and we'll do the 135 degree torque. And if you don't have a torque wrench that measures angle, you can get these little, like, I don't know what you'd call them. Well, they're like angle meters. So it goes in between the torque wrench and the socket. Has a little arm that hits against something. Usually like the outside of this. It's adjustable. And then as you torque, it'll measure the amount of angle you're putting in. But the digital torque wrench makes it really easy. So we're going to use that. And we're going to 135, or no, 130. Alright, so here we go. Number one. Another kind of neat thing about the digital torque wrench is it tells you the torque, where you reach the angle. So it looks like this one was 115 Newton meters. This one was identical, 115 Newton meters, 114. Alright, so now we'll just check to make sure we hit them all via the marks. Yep, all looks good. So there we go, head is on. Go ahead and plug our coolant temp sensor back in. Could have gone a little smoother getting the head on there, but it wasn't too big a deal. So next up, time to do our timing belt. So, ordinarily when you're replacing a timing belt, you'd be replacing all of these components. This idler, this is the tensioner down in the center, along with the water pump. These are all new and they all feel great, so we're going to reuse them, and then we're going to stick with the interval based off of when these components were originally replaced, meaning instead of restarting and saying the timing belt needs to be replaced another 100,000 miles from now or whatever the spec is, it'll be from when the job was done last. Definitely, if the timing belt hasn't been done before, or if it's close to due, replace the belt and all the components. We're just replacing the belt. So that's the next thing. Alright, so I figure I'll show you the official Volvo procedure for timing. So there's what we just did. We torqued the cylinder head. Now we're going to put our cams in. And there's the positioning that we're going to need to do. So this is, let me double check which direction that's looking from. So I believe this is the view from the front of the engine. So this would be the intake cam and the exhaust cam. That's the positioning we're going to shoot for. The cam's positioned like that, and obviously we got to get the valve cover on. There's this special Volvo sealant they call for. We'll be using the one that came with the kit. A couple of things to put on, and then for the timing belt itself, you see there's these special Volvo tools. We are not going to use them because I don't have them, and you don't need them. This is starting from the beginning. Yeah, you can see, so there's the tools. They go into the back of the cams and lock them in. There's these covers, or these little caps that go in, and they'll cover that. So we're going to have to pop the... So there's where the crank tool goes in. Again, we're not going to use that. For our timing belt. So there is the timing mark on the crank that I showed you. And for the timing mark on the cams, kind of the stupid thing is it's part of this plastic rear timing cover part. So we'll have to put that on and then you time it to that. Kind of strange, but whatever. So it's pretty easy to time, honestly. Nothing crazy. It's just the usual. We got to keep the tension on this side of the belt because that's where it goes over the tensioner. And here is how you set the tension. When it's cold, you set it there. If it's really hot, you set it there. And in room temperature, that is where you set it. So, pretty simple procedure. We're going to start off by getting the cams reinstalled. Alright, so for our cam seals, the official procedure is kind of annoying. You're supposed to use that camshaft locking tool. There's no hex on the cam that you can put a wrench on like normal vehicles, I guess, and tighten the camshaft bolt. The idea is that you would use the locking tool that goes between the cams and actually do it in the car. We're not going to do that. So this seal is probably fine, but we have new ones because this one's only 30,000. So since we have it out of the car, we can just fish the seal up and out. We'll put our new one on the same way, and then we can just put the cams in with the seals, and we shouldn't have any problems. Same way I did it last time, and no leaks there, so seems to work out just fine. So before we put our cams in, we're going to go ahead and pre-lube everything. Got our exhaust cam with our new seal. Put a bit of oil on that. I'm going to make sure that the seal surface in the block, or in the head rather, is clean. And then we're going to set our cam in. And then what we're going to do is make sure that our seal is seated square in its groove. Because ordinarily you're going to be driving this in from the front of the engine, so it'll naturally sit. Since we're doing this not exactly by the book, but the easy way, we got to make sure it's sitting square. If it's not sitting square, then you could have issues, but we're looking good. I'll just throw a pick in there and make sure it's pushed all the way around on the bottom. And do the same thing with the intake cam. Another thing we're going to do, which I should have done first actually, is make sure that our cam is in the right position. So that picture I showed you in the manual is how you set the cams in when you don't have the gears on. So what we're going to do is we're going to ballpark it for now and get it as close as we can based off of the timing mark on the gear. So we're going to imagine where the mark on the plastic cover is, and we're going to line the gear up with that. So the mark is basically straight up and down. So I'm actually got to pull this back out, unfortunately, and redo our seal thing. So I've got our mark painted red. That's going to go straight up and down, approximately. We're actually going to go a little bit off, just so that the cam's in its neutral position. And then we'll turn it to where it needs to be once we have everything torqued down. And once again, double check that our seal is sitting properly. Do the same deal with our intake cam, pretty much our neutral position. So now we're ready to deal with sealing our valve cover. So we're going to make sure the entire surface is nice and clean, free of oil. Use some brake clean. This one's really clean because it was bead blasted at the machine shop. So he's got to get the oil off. So for sealing our valve cover, head gasket kit comes with these O-rings for the spark plug holes. So we'll go ahead and put those in. And it also comes with this Reassembling. So this stuff is a non-hardening sealant. It's what it calls for, which is weird to me, but pretty simple to use. So we just put it on where it needs to go, torque it to spec, and then we re-torque after 15 minutes. So I think I'm going to apply to the cylinder head instead of the valve cover, because the valve cover has a bunch of VVT passages. So I'll set you guys up hopefully so you can see. Alright, so you guys got kind of a bird's eye view. Should be pretty simple. Just want to double check that all of our O-rings are in place. We got our cam seals on and they're squared up. One thing I'll mention is cylinder number 4, you might remember, was near top dead center, and you can see that it's at almost max lift on the intake. So I went ahead and turned the engine to our timing mark, because you can see there's no tension, or there's no lift basically right now on cylinder number 1. So it doesn't matter that we're at cylinder 1 top dead center. Oop, a little bit of seepage. So just to be safe, so that our valves don't hit on number 4, I turned the crank to our timing mark. That's what I'm trying to say. So thought I would add that. So now we'll just go around here with our Reinstalling. Stuff's kind of weird. Alright, we'll check the full coverage. Okay, I think we're looking good. We get our valve cover. You know what, actually now I'm thinking about it, just to be safe, because when I took this apart the O-rings had dried out. Do a quick layer around here. So hopefully if our O-rings go bad, this will be a second line of defense. Because pulling the valve cover on this thing is not easy. Okay. Alright, so now we thread in our 10 million valve cover bolts. Being very careful not to drop anything down the plug wells. I probably ought to just throw some plugs in it to be safe for now. One of these is missing. You may have remembered I dropped one. Cannot find it anywhere, so probably just be replacing it at this point. Somewhere in the depths of the engine. I think it's stuck behind the PCV valve slash not valve, but PCV assembly, whatever they use, slash the oil filter housing. I don't want to pull that off, that's to get the bolt, so probably just get one at the junkyard or whatever. Alright, you guys get the idea. I'll just snug these down from center out-ish. There's no official order they need to torque them down, we'll just go center out. And I'll double check what they get torqued to, but just do them evenly, and then we'll come back. And they get torqued to 17 Newton meters. The reason why there's no order is because there's actually, of course, a special tool that clamps them down, and then you're not drawing it in with the bolts, but we'll just, you know, do center out, it'll be fine. Alright, we're all torqued down on the valve cover, and there's one thing that could have been bad, but it wasn't. This motor mount component here fits under the VVT sprocket, and you're supposed to put it on first, and I forgot, obviously, because we're here. And luckily you're able to snake it under, just barely, so we're going to go ahead and put that in now. It's got the 3 bolts on the front. You see 2 of them hanging out and one that I gotta go grab, and then we've got one that goes in from here into the cylinder head. So go ahead and install that while we can, and then we're just about ready to put the timing belt on. Now that we have that motor mount piece on, we are ready to get the timing cover for the top on so that we can get the timing marks. But before we do that, we need to get our oil fill cap on, so put that on. Head gasket kit does not come with a new O-ring, weirdly enough, so we'll run what we've run. Actually, I believe these Torx bolts go to the oil fill. Alright, now for our top cover. Has these little arms. They hook into the motor mount. These are T30s. I also went ahead and just threaded in our spark plugs, a couple threads, just to keep junk from getting in there. We're going to probably want to pop them out when we rotate around to check timing, because we don't want to fight compression. But good to have them in there for now. One annoying thing is that this cover actually kind of blocks access to that spark plug. Why not just have it cut out? I don't know. Now, turn on the light. There's the timing mark on the cover. There's the timing mark on the gear. It's really hard to get you in there to get a head-on view. It's actually hard to get in there for me to get a head-on view. But one data point we can use is there are 18 teeth on the belt between this timing mark and the other timing mark. So that'll help us know relative to the crank, or relative to the cams, if we're correct. And then the crank, obviously, we're going to double check that that's still where it is supposed to be. Actually, I forgot. I just moved it, so we're going to have to actually turn it a hair. First, let's do the cams. So these cam bolts are a T55. Apparently really tricky to get in there. So this one needs to turn back. It may not rest there just because, oh boy. Hoping a wrench on this thing will work, but uh-oh, that's not good. Shoot. We just loosened that, which means it was never very tight. Okay, well, let's take this cover back off and we'll torque that bolt. I'll show you how I think we're going to do it. Alright, so what we're going to do, get our old belt, slip it over, make sure we're engaged on all the teeth. I'm going to take vice grips. Okay, so got that clamped. Hopefully that'll give us enough leverage to torque on. Go with the torque wrench. Alright, so we're going to try to torque this to 120 Newton meters. Ah, gosh. This don't think I really want to torque it like that. Yeah, we gotta pop this motor mount out, unfortunately. That's annoying. Okay, 3 bolts later, here we are. Move you guys over so I don't knock you over. Yeah, let's see what we can do. Hopefully not any damage. You guys are... tricky. Ugh. It's wanting to cam out on me. Ideally, you could get a hand, but I need to be able to support it. That's the trouble. I'll try a different bit. Let's see if that'll help us out at all. Torx was not the smartest choice on this. Alright, so it's official. I am simply an idiot, which makes sense because I couldn't believe that they would spec a bolt like that to be torqued to 120 Newton meters, and in fact they don't. That's the bolt. That was just a cover. So simple enough. I got a new cover for it, so we'll pop those off so that we can turn the sprockets easily. Turns out they probably are torqued just fine because I haven't touched them, so live and learn. Alright, so I'm going to get the other cover off, and then we'll get the timing cover back on, and finally get our timing belt installed. Alright, so we are lined up on the intake cam, lined up on the exhaust cam, which I can't even really see it, but camera helps. And finally, we are lined up on the crank. So, we're ready to slip our belt over. It's pretty simple. If you are not, or since we're not replacing the tensioner, what we need to do is just loosen the bolt. I've already done that, so all the tension is off of it. And then the belt routing, it comes up off the crank. The back side of the belt on the left side goes over the tensioner. The inside of the belt meshes with the water pump, comes up and around, backside on that idler, back down to the crank. So really simple. Should hopefully go on nice and easy. And once it's on there, we're going to double check by counting the teeth between the cams. We'll rotate a full revolution by hand just to make sure there's no interference or anything. And then we can lock it down. Looks like this belt is not directional. If it was directional, there would be arrows. And obviously, if there's arrows, you gotta put it that way for the direction of travel. Alright, so it looks like we got too much slack over on this side. We need to shift one of our cams over a little bit. Alright, camera's kind of getting in my way, so I'm just going to wrestle this on and bring you guys back. Basically, all that I'm trying to do is make sure all the timing marks are lined up. There shouldn't really be any slack here, and if there is too much slack, then you won't be able to get the belt over the tensioner, and also it would probably be a tooth at a time. So once I got it on there, I'll bring you guys back and show you how it all fits together. Alright, so our belt is on. We've rotated around one time and put the crank back at where it's supposed to be. You can see these timing marks are not perfect with the plastic cover. I mean, you can see there's deflection in it, so it's going to be within a tooth, because you can see if we move over a tooth, it gets way worse. So you see they're close, and then we've got 18 teeth on the belt. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 18 teeth between those marks. So that's one way you can tell. Make sure that the teeth on the cams at least are proper relative to each other. So setting the tension, you can see it's really hard to get a camera down in there, but on the tensioner, I'll show you the picture in the Volvo diagnostic software. There's a little Allen key slot right there, and a little, get this zoomed out, pointer right there. And as you rotate the Allen key with the center bolt loose, that moves over clockwise, and the farther clockwise the more tension you have. And there's two marks. You can see we're right about in the center. It's hard to tell because, you know, we're looking down off center, but it's about in the center, which is where we want to be for, you know, room-ish temperature, which is what it is right now. And once we get it there, we tighten down the center bolt. So let me show you the picture in the software, and it might explain it a little better. There's our timing marks, and then you can see here's our tensioner. And here's what I'm talking about. So really hot temperatures, you do a little bit less tension. Or sorry, really cold temperatures, you do a little less tension. Really hot temperatures, you go to the max mark, and in the middle, you go in the middle. So easy enough. That's just how you set the tension. And you torque the center to 24 Newton meters. Alright, I got our cam bolt VVT sprocket covers on. Not torqued to the moon. So we are ready now to get our timing covers on. Let's start with the lowest one, which we have a new one for because the old one was warped, like I showed you. So this one clips on the side and has one bolt that we'll get to. So set you guys up. Actually, there's one below it. So I forgot to start the camera back up, but the important thing is you can see it slots in down there and on the other side as well. So, and then these clips here and here clip in, and then there's another one on the other side, and then finally we have one bolt that goes into the motor mount right there. Alright, so if I remember correctly, this little guy is the bolt for this hole. Alright, so next we can get this cover installed. So it has these little tabs that are supposed to slide in. It's a little annoying to get in where it's supposed to go. We need to pop the top cover off, see. Also, it slots into the rear part of the timing cover, so you're gonna make sure that goes. Let's just pop this off. It needs to come off anyway, so we can do the spark plugs. Alright, so I think actually the motor mount may need to go on, because I think it retains this side. I don't know, we'll see. This whole plastic timing cover thing's pretty annoying in my opinion, but whatever. So, first up, we gotta get this part of the mount back on. Alright, next up is the actual engine part of the mount. We're gonna have to shimmy everything around to get this in. So let's go get the jack under here. Hate this sealant stuff. Alright, there we go. Motor mount's back on. Let's make sure this cover will go on now. I'll be honest, I'm not entirely sure the order they want this to go on. But it's on there. And then it hooks on the other side. And once that's on, hopefully it'll keep it pulled tight. I don't know why it would have killed them to not just put a couple bolts in this so it actually sits properly, but while we're up here, let's get our VVT solenoids in. So these are different from each other. I'm gonna have to look up the part number and see which is which. Alright, so this adjuster, part number 31216222, is the exhaust. And we have this O-ring, which weirdly enough the kit didn't come with a new one, but there is a seal on the end that we have to use. Did come with a new one for that. Then this will go on the exhaust side. And then 16221 is the intake side. And then both are just 8mm bolts. So, before we put this on and get the plugs or the coils all on, I'm gonna go ahead and put the exhaust nuts on. So, they just have this washer and then a nut, obviously. Not a whole lot I can show you because I don't even think I can see back there. You just kind of do it by feel. So I'll get those on, bring it back, and we'll get the coils installed before moving on to the intake. Alright, exhaust is good to go. Got the heat shield and everything on. Spark plugs are tightened down, so let's go ahead and get our coils installed. Also get our cam position sensors installed. These are identical to each other, so it doesn't matter which side goes where. Alright, so before we put our intake on, we gotta deal with this mess on the back of the head. There's a couple things we gotta put back on, rather, and figure out exactly how this goes. So we have this bracket that needs to go on. Got one normal bolt and one funky giant headed bolt. So I gotta remember how that goes. But before that goes on, actually, we gotta put in our caps. So here's our two new camshaft sealing caps. These go in the rear of the head. You see one hole here. There's one farther back. So we gotta push these in. I'm gonna put a light coat of silicone on the outside. So I'll just do a skim coat. Just to make sure we don't have to deal with any leaks back there. And we should just push in. Tap a little bit. Okay. One smaller hammer. Alright, so we got our caps in. We also have this water outlet that needs to thread into the head, so we'll do that real quick. Next is this bracket. Now we can start getting everything reattached as far as wiring harnesses and whatnot. Alright, so we got the wire harness kind of laid out where it's going to be. I think now let's get the lower intake on. I removed it as one whole piece, but I think it's easier if we split it apart, so I'll show you real quick. So you can see there's an upper plastic part and a lower aluminum part. I'm just going to pull the 8mm bolts out to separate them. That'll make it easier for us to put the fuel rail back on. One last thing we're going to do before we get the intake on is actually change the oil filter. You can see we got super easy access to it right now. So might as well make it easy on ourselves. Takes a giant wrench. 36. It actually looks like almost a brand new filter, but we will replace it. Want to make sure to get our intake gasket oriented properly. Cleaned off the intake manifold. And you see it's got these kind of like reed valve things. They line up with those holes. It only goes one way, so easy enough. We do have this PCV nipple that goes into this hose down here. Grab some bolts. The lower bolts, the hole in the intake manifold is actually slotted, so you just really need to loosen them to remove the whole thing, but they were coming out anyways. These all snugged up. Alright, so lower intake manifold's all torqued up. Just need to get our PCV hose through. Okay, so there's that PCV hose. Looks like we're all squared away there. We'll go ahead and replace all of our O-rings for the injectors, because we got new ones. Give them just a little bit of lube. Sit down. Okay. Got our fuel rail bolts. I believe these were them. Certainly seems like it, but I don't know Alright, so there's 2 bolts over here. Finally remembered. Get it started. Only 2 of these bolts actually go into the intake manifold. This last one here seems to not go into anything, but finally remembered there's this little shield. Goes like so. Not entirely sure the purpose there, but okay, now we can plug them all back in. And you should be good to go for the upper manifold. So this upper portion has these push-in style seals, so we'll go ahead and replace them all. You just pull right out and new ones push right back in. And again, we just have all these 8mm bolts that go up into the plastic part. Where did that go? Pretty sure we just have one. Also up front we have our dipstick to put back in. I'm trying to remember where it even bolts into. Probably gonna have to look at a picture. Finally figured it out. The dipstick bolts to that boss on the oil filter housing. So we'll fish the tube down there. Alright, so we got that bolted up. Now we'll connect our crankcase breather hose up to the intake. I'm gonna have to grab a hose clamp for that. Alright, so we need to plug in our throttle body. Get the intake hose over. Alright, we got a few things to wrap up here. We got our coolant hose that connects to the back of the head. Just pops right over, at least it should. But it does not because the clip is broken. Forgot about that. Okay, so we'll have to deal with that at some point. Not a huge deal. There's 2 bolts that hold the wire harness there. I gotta track them down. That's simple enough. Up top here, we do have some ground strap connections. We have one here, one there, and finally we have one right here. So we'll do all those. Alright, so a couple things to add for the intake manifold. I actually had to pop it back off because the nipple over here broke off, so I epoxied it back on nice and strong. But I realized that I forgot something while we had the timing cover taken apart. So it's nothing super major, it's just really annoying, is this breather hose or hard line. This goes to the turbo, and unfortunately you cannot get it on with the cam sprockets on there, so we are not going to even put it on. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to run a soft line. That's what connects to this hose down here. Oh, where is it? There it is. So this nipple down here, I have the hose off. Right there. That just comes up and around and connects that hose hanging there. So that was my bad. I just forgot the hard line, but we're just gonna run some 7/16 soft line all the way around. I mean, there's no downside to that really. It makes it a little bit easier to service in case it ever gets gunked up, I guess. Just something to note. So we're getting very close. Also, that coolant line clip on the back of the head, the bleeder hose. Unfortunately, this is a hose that is specific only to this model and year. So I'm gonna have to order in a new one of those. I can't even find the clip anywhere. I was hoping I could pull it out of the junkyard, but I don't think they use it anywhere else. So for now, it's all done with a bread clip. But you can see it works. So while the other hose is on order, we can at least run this thing through its paces and make sure all is good. So I'm gonna get our intake manifold back to where we left off, and then we will continue on. All right, let's get our torque arm, or whatever you want to call it, back in. So it just fits in like that. We're gonna have to pull our coolant bottle out a hair, disconnect these lines. These are both 15 millimeters. There's how that rear one goes in. Should be good to let our coolant recovery tank sit back in where it goes. So it has this little retaining clip here that it pushes down onto. And up top we have a little 10 millimeter bolt to keep it retained. We should be done up here, so let's throw our final timing cover piece on for good. Well, hopefully for good. This thing's always a pain to get on with the motor mount. I probably should have put it on first. But you have to be able to get it off because obviously you gotta be able to do spark plugs and stuff. So. Okay, well we got the oil cap open, might as well put our oil in. 6 quarts of full synthetic 530. Alright, I think we're ready to get our air box in. Get all this junk out of here. So it sits in real easy. If you remember, it just pops right out. Let me see if I've got some silicone spray to spray in those little grommets so it's easy to come out if it ever needs to come out again. Silicone grease is good enough. Just do a little tiny bit to just keep it from binding up like it was before. Okay, there's that. Alright, so we got our mass airflow to connect. ECU connectors to reconnect. And I believe that's it for the air box. Get our charge pipe on. There's that PCV connector that was hanging out back here. Connects up and under into the nipple on the charge pipe. And then this also has the two 10 millimeter bolts that affix it to the valve cover. Actually, they're 8 millimeter, I believe. Alright, so I think we're just about fully reconnected up here. Let's get some coolant in it, and we can let it burp while we are under the car putting the crank damper back on along with the accessory belt. So this calls for G48 coolant. I think G05 also works, but it's not the right color, so it mixes into a gross color. But I think it also meets the spec, but G48 is the way to go. Should only take up to 2 gallons. Hopefully I close that pet cock. I believe that leak is just me. Alright, well, it's trickling it down. Let's turn our attention to the wheel well. Alright, so we're going to pop our nut off because we're using that to turn the crank. And I believe earlier I said this is a 29 or an inch and 3/16. It's actually a 30 or inch and 3/16. So you see we have our alignment dowel up there. That means our crank damper only fits on one way. So we've got the center nut, and then we also have these 4 perimeter bolts. So the center nut gets torqued to 180 Newton meters, and these perimeter bolts get torqued to 25 Newton meters, and then an additional 60 degrees, which is kind of weird for these little guys, but that is what we will do. Alright, so I believe the last thing we got to do before we can fire it up and do a test start make sure all's good before we get all the wheel well back in and everything. We got to get our serpentine belt on. So it's a little bit annoying because it's just tight to get to the tensioner, which I'll show you from down below. The routing is pretty simple. It just goes around the crank pulley, up around the alternator. The back side of the belt goes around the tensioner. I should probably double check this, but I think it's right. And then off the tensioner, the inside of the belt goes around the power steering pump back to the crank. So I'll bring you down and show you the tensioner. Alright, so actually here's the proper belt routing. We come up around the crank pulley, over to the power steering pump, up to the alternator, and then around backside of the belt on the tensioner. So let me bring it down and show you how the tensioner can release its tension. Alright, so you can just see the tensioner peeking up there. This is where you put the ratchet to remove the tension. So it's a T50, and you rotate it counterclockwise, I believe, to release the tension. I mean, it's either or. It's pretty simple to tell. So I'm going to wrestle that on there and bring you guys back once it's on, and I think we'll be ready to fire up. Alright, so here's our belt on. You see how it comes around. Bring it down. Around the tensioner. So pretty simple routing. I found the easiest way to get it on is get it around the alternator, the power steering pump, and the tensioner. You can get your ratchet up here, pull it down, and slip the belt over the crank. Pretty easy, so not too bad. I'm going to do a final once over, make sure I got everything plugged in, connected. We'll throw the battery on. I think I charged it, so hopefully it's good to go, and fire it up. Alright, so I think everything's looking good here. I'm sure there's something I forgot, but it should be obvious, hopefully. So I'm gonna go hop in, hopefully got charge in the battery, and see if she fires up. Battery's dead, so go grab the charger and hopefully got enough juice. Yeah, we got a service airbag light on, but that's probably just from monkeying around with it. Sounds like it's running good though. Nice and smooth. No leaks other than what I spilled, I think. Cool. Well, I'll probably let it come up to temp. Make sure the coolant system's all burped. So once it comes up to temp, the thermostat will open. I'll probably need more coolant. In the meantime, I'll get the wheel liner on for the passenger side where we were getting at the timing belt stuff. Get the wheel on and we should be good to take her for a drive. Alright, running great so far. So let's take it out on the road. Drive around a little bit, get all the fluids moving around, get the brakes cleared off of rust. And then we'll open her up a little bit, make sure all's good under full throttle. I think this thing has had a boost pipe pop off before, which was a little nerve-wracking. But these are quick little cars for what they are. I mean, plenty quick enough. Alright, we'll give her the flat foot treatment coming off here. Make sure nothing blows up. Good all the way up, so I think we can call that good. We'll take her back, check all the fluids, but I think it's got a clean bill of health now, so yeah. Alright, so everything looks good. There's no drips on the ground, coolant's still in there, oil's good, so we will send this thing down the road. Thanks for tagging along. Hopefully you either found this informative or interesting or entertaining maybe. So until next time, I will see ya.